Good morning. Welcome to the online Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign. Our mission is to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace. I am Chris Hanauer, coming to you not live, but from the magnolia tree in my backyard, about which more in a moment. You may also be hearing me through the graces of community radio station WRFU at 104.5 FM. We thank them for helping us reach as many people as possible. This is our first summer service of the COVID-19 era, so you will probably notice that it is different from the services we've been having lately. It is entirely pre-recorded, which is going to be the model for the summer so that we can give our volunteers a bit of a break. Now, why, you ask, am I in a tree? Well, it's not just any tree. As I mentioned, it's a magnolia tree, and it's in our backyard, and it was one of the things we loved about the house when we first decided to buy it. In the spring, it's a giant pink beacon of hope with its thousands and thousands of blossoms. In the fall, the leaves hang on until late November and then fall all at once in a wonderful thick carpet that is really easy to rake up. Our children have spent hours in this tree, climbing and even reading in it. So it's a very important part of my natural landscape. Our speaker today is Rob Kanter, a good friend of mine who many of you probably know through his work on the Environmental Almanac on WILL and in the News-Gazette. As you will see, Rob is all about engaging with nature where you are, so a tree in my backyard seemed the perfect place to start. Mary Oliver wrote a poem called Sometimes, a small part of which is this: Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. As you will see, these are words that Rob lives by and that we should all aspire to follow as well. Each Sunday, we begin with a land acknowledgement of the indigenous nations of this land. Wherever you are, please bring to mind the indigenous peoples of your place. There will be a moment of silence after the acknowledgement. We recognize and acknowledge that we gather today on indigenous land, taken through deception, coercion, and violence. We acknowledge the continued displacement and oppression of Native people and honor their commitments to survival, identity, and the protection of our world. Thank you. This morning, as we light our chalice, we immerse ourselves once again in the words of Mary Oliver, this time from her essay, Upstream. Please join with me in our unison chalice lighting. I walked all one day upstream, sometimes in the midst of the ripples and sometimes along the shore. I was walking the wrong way, upstream instead of downstream. Yet there I was, slopping along happily in the stream's coolness. If this was lost, let us all be lost always. Well, I've had to leave my beloved tree, but it's still behind me, as you can see. Please join Austin Cody now in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.
This reading is an excerpt from Aldo Leopold's 1949 A Sand County Almanac, one of my grandmother's favorite books. Listen to what he says about what it takes to relate to the natural world and what it doesn't. Let no man jump to the conclusion that Babbitt must take his PhD in ecology before he can see his country. On the contrary, the PhD may become as callous as an undertaker to the mysteries at which he officiates. Like all real treasures of the mind, perception can be split into infinitely small fractions without losing its quality. The weeds in a city lot convey the same lesson as the redwoods. The farmer may see in his cow pasture what may not be vouchsafed to the scientist adventuring in the South Seas. Perception, in short, cannot be purchased with either learned degrees or dollars. It grows at home as well as abroad, and he who has a little may use it to as good advantage as he who has much.
Each month, we share half of our Sunday offering with organizations in alignment with our values. This month, our shared offering is Uniting Pride, the only LGBTQ+ resource center in East Central Illinois. We now have a way for you to give quickly and easily by text and credit card. Any funds you give by text will be shared equally by Uniting Pride and UUCUC. You can also visit our website after the service to make your donation or pay your pledge or, yes, I have to say it, your service auction balance. That URL will be on your screen shortly. Thank you. The offering will now be received.
Each Sunday, we bring our individual joys and sorrows to our time together. And during this time in the service, we share those joys and sorrows. This is the first week that we've asked our members and friends to submit their joys and sorrow by Friday evening so that we could pre-record our service. And fortunately, most people didn't get that message, so we have only one joy to share with you this morning, which makes it all the more special. You can still share a joy and sorrow by sending an email to joysandsorrows@uucuc.org. Any joy or sorrow that we receive during this service or after this service will be included in next week's e-news, which is our weekly newsletter, or during next week's service. But for now, please join me in celebrating this joy from Chuck and Jan Cooper. Chuck wrote, "We were delighted to learn last week that Jan's daughter, Susan, an NBC producer, won a 2020 Peabody Award in Journalism for her November 2019 story with Richard Engel about the president's abandonment of the Kurds in northern Syria." Congratulations, Chuck and Jan, for that great news. And now please join me for a short time of reflection, prayer, or meditation.
This is from Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, 2013, Braiding Sweetgrass. This section is titled, Learning the Grammar of Animacy. Learning the grammar of animacy could well be a restraint on our mindless exploitation of the land. But there's more to it. I have heard our elders give advice like, "You should go among the standing people," or "Go spend time with those beaver people." They remind us of the capacity of others as our teachers, as holders of knowledge, as guides. Imagine walking through a richly inhabited world of birch people, bear people, rock people, beings we think of and therefore speak of as persons, worthy of our respect, of inclusion in peopled world. We Americans are reluctant to learn even a foreign language of our own species, let alone other species. But imagine the possibilities. Imagine the access we would have to different perspectives, the things we might see through others' eyes, the wisdom that surrounds us. We don't have to figure out everything by ourselves. There are intelligences other than our own, teachers all around us. Imagine how much less lonely the world would be.
Good morning. Thank you collectively for inviting me to speak today. I'm disappointed not to be able to be with you in person, but grateful we have such a rich variety of workarounds that allow us to come up with a next best thing. Normally, when I have an opportunity to talk with a group, I'm standing near the front of a room with a slide presentation running behind me, and I kind of alternate between looking at prepared notes and riffing on the slide that's shown there. In a similar vein, this morning, my plan is to speak into a laptop while I share a screen with you. And I'll be honest, I've had a lot of technical difficulty getting to this point, trying to make this look like a professional production. So I'm going to say here now that I have totally given up on that. So if I need to pause, I'm going to pause. If I need to click over to a different screen to get to my notes, I'm going to click over to a different screen. And I'm not going to stop the recording because I've already spent quite a bit of time trying to get it just right. And I take it that you will understand because you've probably been through some of these frustrations of your own in the not too distant past. As I talk today, I'd ask you to keep in mind how much the world's collective consciousness has changed since Chris Hanauer and I agreed that this would be the date where I would speak to you, which I know when we agreed to that thanks to my email archive, and that was back on February 24th. In brief, although COVID-19 and systemic racism were both clearly forces in our world, it was not clear that either one would dominate public discourse and activities the way they've come to since then. Situating my remarks, in the context of the pandemic is actually relatively easy, since what I'm trying to do is to encourage people to slow down and attend to the world around them, and we've all kind of been forced to do that since the middle of March. Situating my thinking with respect to the social dynamics being challenged so powerfully by the Black Lives Matter movement is going to require some more work on my part. And about all I can say is that work is ongoing. So I'm going to cut over now to a different mode, and you'll be able to see me as I struggle with this. And if I do this, as far as I can tell now, I have made it possible for you to see the slideshow that I'm working with. And now if I can get the slideshow to work as a slideshow. Here we go. So this is Cultivating Connections with the Natural World at Home. And this is the special pandemic edition, which is heavy on what I've seen in my backyard this spring. And I'll go here to some slides that show I'm not immune to the kind of experience, that longing for the kind of experience in nature that is so common in our culture. This is where I'd like to imagine myself. I like to think of myself, fishing in the West with my brother and my nephew. This is us last year in Montana. I like to think of myself and the camping vacations that I've had with my family, where we go hiking in Colorado, get to see, showy wildlife like baby elk cavorting in the field. There's our campsite. There's the moose that walked right through our campsite. This is wildlife. This is nature that comes right to you. That's kind of the easy stuff. Here's my U of I class that, again, I have 2 classes that I get to spend time in really cool places. This one's in Baraboo, Wisconsin at Aldo Leopold's shack last fall. This is a group in Costa Rica a couple of years back, where in a normal year I take 20 engaged, intelligent young people to experience environment there. And, we get to see things like 3-toed sloths, white-faced capuchin monkeys, speckle-bellied tanagers, long-tailed manakins, 3-wattled bellbird. If you can't appreciate that, if you're not if you don't feel a connection to the natural world there, maybe there's something more going on. But this is not where I spend most of my life. And now I'm trying to get over to my script just so I can see my notes. Even in a good year, these kind of experiences occupy only about 3 weeks or so. Most of the time, I'm at home here in central Illinois. And where I actually am most of the time is here at home on West Park Avenue in Champaign, here in my office at the University of Illinois, sitting in front of a computer, putting together a slideshow for a talk like this. And as this satellite shot reminds us, there are no mountains to hike in here. There's nowhere for elk to cavort. There's no coastline. There's nowhere for 3-toed sloths or white-faced capuchin monkeys to hang out. In fact, most of the surrounding landscape where we might escape to is pretty hostile to life. In a cornfield, by one guy's count, in a book that surveyed the life of 1 square meter, I think 1 square meter, 1 square yard somewhere, in a cornfield that's working well, the life there is corn and not much else. So if we're going to enjoy, if we're going to take pleasure in the natural world, we're going to have to be able to discover treasures where others see nothing unusual. This is the most appropriate fortune cookie I've ever gotten in my life. And I think it's something that I would encourage other people to think of it as their fortune too, because, I don't have particularly good eyes or particularly good ears. It's looking to discover is the key here. So what I'm going to share with you now are some of the wild things that I observed while I spent a lot of time in my backyard in March. If I can get my screen back to where I want it. This black-throated blue warbler in most years would be, hands down the most exciting wildlife that I saw in my yard. He showed up on a Friday in late April and hung around for nearly a week. These guys are seen less often than most of the 20-some other species of warblers that migrate through Illinois. To see one of them as a treat, to have one cooperate for photographs and hang around your yard for a week is beyond even that, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure I would have spotted this bird if I had been going to work on campus, but I would not have seen it and heard him sing the way I got to this year. Oh, and there's a picture of him as he was singing. Um, the same goes for this winter wren, which this is a picture taken through the sliding door just to grab it while it was so close. This also made an extended stopover in our yard. It first appeared right on the little stone patio outside our home office while I was teaching a Zoom class. At the time, one of my students was presenting her work for the week, and I regret to say I just completely tuned her out for a couple of minutes as I watched it. Winter wrens are regulars in natural areas like Busey Woods in the winter, but they're not at all common. And in all my time birding, I've never had one as a yard bird, as we say. They really like to be in heavy cover near the ground, and I think the stick piles I've made in my yard may have enticed this one to stay. And you can see this, he's perched on a stump here. Behind him is a stick pile that he was hanging out in that I left there specifically as an something to attract birds like that. Another super cool bird that made an extended stay in the yard in early April was this yellow-bellied sapsucker, and I've got two pictures of him here because I couldn't decide which one I liked better. The one on the left shows him actually drilling a hole in that tree, and you can see the sap starting to come out there a little bit. And the other one is just that really sharp profile picture that, as a bird photographer, I'm always looking for. Anyway, gorgeous bird. You may remember this one as the bird that Miss Jane Hathaway was always after, if you were a fan of the Beverly Hillbillies like I was. Maybe you already know this too. Sapsuckers drill numerous shallow holes in trees and then revisit them to drink the sap and to eat the insects that are attracted to it. What I learned from watching the activity of this one was that various other creatures also took advantage. There was a white-breasted nuthatch there, a ruby-crowned kinglet, as well as other birds and even squirrels. I didn't get pictures of all of them. I've also learned something about the eating habits of other birds by watching them from my home office as well. For example, I noticed that a Swainson's thrush, which is the bird pictured on the right here on top of our fence, and an eastern phoebe, the bird on the left, had both been spending a lot of time on the ground. So I set up a stick hoping they'd perch on it long enough for photographs. And you can see that the phoebe is perched on a stick that I put out in the yard specifically to try to get him to perch there. By taking pictures of them and just, watching what they were up to, I figured out that they were eating the digger bees that congregate in our yard in the spring. And I'm going to see if I can switch to that picture now. Here's the phoebe with a digger bee, and they'd have to kind of bang it against a branch or something to kill it, to eat it. Here's the Swainson's thrush, also with the same kind of bee that it's caught in its bill. So anyway, yeah, the bees were congregating in the yard to mate and to make their little solitary nests, and the birds were congregating in the yard to eat the bees. This is a picture of a digger bee. They're kind of cool in and of themselves, and you may have seen them without knowing what they were. You don't see them normal, or I don't recognize them most of the year, but during early April, they're the ones you see where there's some bare soil and they buzz just 4, 5, 6 inches above the ground, and see a whole bunch of them in one place. Let me show you just a few of the other birds that hung around the yard this spring, just to, by way of showing there's always something going on there. This is a Carolina wren. This is the wren that you're probably more familiar with. They're in town all year, and this is the bird that sings probably more than any other. They're singing in January, they're singing in July, and they make an awful lot of sound for a bird that small. Also in migration, ruby-crowned kinglet that's stopped, and he's in a spice bush that's just blooming, so that must have been back in April. And a white-throated sparrow, which maybe you know that one from the way it sings. It comes as it comes through. That's a and this is a eastern wood pewee, which you may recognize as a bird that sings its own name. And since I imitated a white-throated sparrow, I might as well point this one out because they're still singing now in the summer. It says pewee, and so it kind of sings its own name. And a least flycatcher that also made a stopover in the yard. It's perched in a pawpaw tree there. And you know, I get excited about any of the birds, but I know that some of the flycatcher is a little drab for most taste. Here's a hooded warbler that I photographed a couple of years back in the same part of the yard. It's singing away. Blackburnian warbler, one of my favorites to see, also perched in a branch in the backyard. And black-throated green warbler. So the point of all this really is that there's a ton that, you know, goes on here in the spring if you're open to it, that you don't have to be in Costa Rica and you don't have to be out west to see wildlife. There's stuff right here in town. Ironically, of course, it's the fact that we're situated in the middle of all those cornfields where there's nothing going on, which means that these pretty birds, when they come through in the spring, are all concentrated here in town. Last bird picture for the day is the Cooper's hawk, which is, so we talked about the songbirds are enticed there by the insect food, and the Cooper's hawk is enticed here by the songbirds as well as the chickens that we have in the back. So as much as I want to encourage people to connect with the natural world through an appreciation for birds, we're really kind of at a lull in the birding year now. Spring migration is finished and most resident birds are nesting. And because of that, they're a little less visible and most of them a little less vocal than usual. Fortunately, this is a great time of year to pay attention to butterflies, which are another favorite backyard thing for me. Since I feel like monarchs get enough attention elsewhere, I'll breeze by a couple of pictures of monarchs on native wildflowers in the backyard, and then go to a story about the other ones, some of my other favorites. So spice bush is a shrub that's a native to the understory of local woodlands in central Illinois, and it's beautiful in its own right. But I started planting it in my yard with an ulterior motive. I wanted to see for myself the caterpillars of spicebush swallowtail butterflies. So here's an adult spicebush swallowtail. I had seen pictures of these caterpillars in books and online, but I had never been able to find them in the wild. And I thought, well, maybe I could find one in my backyard. So in the early stages of their development, spicebush swallowtails have two ways of avoiding predation. They can stay out of sight by retreating into little shelters, which they create by folding a leaf over on itself into a shape that kind of reminds me of a taco. And so you can see this white webbing here is what this little caterpillar has put there. And I'm holding this leaf open, but if I let it go, that webbing that he's put there creates enough tension to fold that leaf over on it and make a little tent for him. Alternatively, of course, it also can be in the open a fair bit just because it looks like bird poop and tries to go unnoticed. As they mature, spicebush swallowtails maintain the practice of hiding during the day in those little leaf shelters, but they also adopt a new style of camouflage. Their bodies become bright green, and their forward end develops a triangular appearance with dark eye-like spots. So they end up looking like tiny snakes. There he is in his folded over shelter, looking like a tiny snake looking out at you. There he is on a leaf, so that you can see that's when it's in its full tiny snake mode. So yeah, I succeeded by planting spice bush in my yard, getting spice bush swallowtail caterpillars there. And the spice bush habit actually expanded to other types of shrubs that I've planted in my yard to make it resemble the understory of a woodland. Since we inherited all those great overstory trees, I wanted to make the understory like a native woodland. So this is a list of 14, 15, 16 of these various native shrubs. And most of them also are, really good for supporting insect life and thereby supporting bird life and other wildlife as well. But these are the kind of insects that you can enjoy. So these are the caterpillars of tiger swallowtails, and that's the adult of that one. This is adult, the dark form of the tiger swallowtail caterpillar. This is the bird poop stage of a giant swallowtail caterpillar. It also has a little snake phase, and then looks like this as an adult. And then there's the black swallowtail. Now this, maybe you're more familiar with this one because this is the one, if you've got dill or parsley planted in your garden, is going to devour those plants, especially if you have more than one on them. That's a newly emerged black swallowtail butterfly on parsley that is almost completely denuded there, that it was eating as a larvae. Under normal circumstances, this talk really wouldn't have much of an ending, since by this point, listeners are so anxious to share their own stories, they just jump in as soon as I stop, or even slow down enough. But today, let me add this. I don't see cultivating an appreciation for wildlife as an escape from or substitute for cultivating better relations among people, but as a means by which people can maintain the health and strength needed to do that work effectively. Thank you again for listening.
Our closing words today come from our great UU forebear, Henry David Thoreau. All nature is doing her best each moment to make us well. She exists for no other end. Do not resist her. With the least inclination to be well, we should not be sick. And now we will extinguish the chalice.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we're together again. Amen.